The air at the track was electric, thick with the scent of hay, leather, and nervous anticipation. For Matthew, it felt less like electricity and more like a gathering storm. Today was everything. His entire savings and a significant loan were riding on a magnificent black stallion named Phantom's Legacy, or Phantom for short. This wasn't just the horse's first competitive event. It was Matthew's last chance to turn his passion into a viable future. He moved through the crowd, his smile tighter than he would have liked, shaking hands with potential bettors, painting a picture of guaranteed victory. He was so engrossed in his performance that he failed to notice a young woman slip through the periphery of the bustling prep area. She moved with a quiet purpose, her eyes scanning the enclosures, completely out of place among the boisterous, moneyed crowd. Phantom, usually a pillar of calm amidst chaos, was being led by a groom through the pen. He was a creature of routine, unfazed by the noise and the press of people. But as he passed near the spot where the young woman stood, something shifted. It was a change so abrupt, so total, that it felt like a switch had been flipped inside the animal. Matthew had never seen anything like it. One moment, Phantom was the steady, professional athlete he knew. The next, he was a primal force of nature. His eyes, once soft and intelligent, widened with a look of wild recognition. He let out a sharp, piercing whinny that cut through the murmur of the crowd and began to buck and jump, his powerful muscles coiling and releasing with terrifying force. The groom, caught completely off guard, lost his grip on the reins. Panic rippled through the onlookers. People standing near the fence scrambled back instinctively. Other horses in the vicinity, sensing Phantom's distress, began to grow nervous, their own whinnies adding to the growing cacophony. Watching the scene unfold, a few astute observers noticed the stallion's frenzied gaze was fixed in one direction. It became chillingly clear that the unassuming young woman was the trigger. As the other horses were quickly led away, Matthew remained frozen, his mind racing to comprehend what had set his horse off. Phantom was now a whirlwind of uncontrolled energy, galloping wildly around the pen. All Matthew could do was pray he would tire himself out. But Phantom wasn't calming down. He was just getting started. Without a flicker of warning, he lowered his head, turned, and charged full speed at a section of the tall, reinforced gate. A collective gasp swept through the crowd. Nearly everyone had stopped what they were doing, their attention now riveted on the unfolding chaos, and in that moment of stunned silence, the young woman stepped forward from the edge of the crowd. She moved with an unnerving calm, as if she had been waiting for this exact signal. Matthew's heart plummeted into his stomach as he watched Phantom gather himself for an impossible feat. The fence was designed to keep 1,000 pounds of agitated thoroughbred contained. Everyone in the racing world knew a horse bred for speed could never clear a jump that high. But now it was happening. Time seemed to slow as Phantom launched himself into the air, his powerful body soaring over the barrier with breathtaking grace. He landed on the other side with a heavy thud, his hooves digging into the dirt. Matthew was paralyzed by a dual terror, for Phantom, who could have been seriously injured, and for the girl, who now stood directly in the path of the charging stallion. It was undeniable now. Phantom's focus was locked on her, and she was the reason for this terrifying display. He was thundering towards her at full speed, and Matthew still had no clue why. Had he seen her before? Was this some kind of bizarre attack? He couldn't imagine his gentle horse hurting anyone, but today had shattered every expectation. To everyone's astonishment, the expected collision never came. The wild horse reached the girl, his sides heaving, but instead of trampling her, he skidded to a halt right beside her. He stood there, trembling but still, his head lowered as if in offering. For a split second, Matthew allowed himself to believe the crisis was over. He was completely wrong. What happened next was even more unbelievable. The girl, her expression serene, reached up and ran a hand along Phantom's neck. Then, with a fluidity that spoke of years of practice, she swung herself onto his bare back. There was no saddle, no bridle, only the raw connection between them. And just like that, as if they were a single being, they took off. They moved with a seamless grace, weaving through the stunned onlookers and out of the prep area. Matthew stood frozen, a statue of disbelief, unable to process the scene he had just witnessed. Before he could even shout, before he could think to move, the girl and Phantom were gone. He stood there for a long moment, the sounds of the track fading into a dull roar in his ears. In the distance, he could still see the silhouette of the horse racing away, growing smaller with every powerful stride. The fading screams of startled people jumping from their path echoed behind them. By the time Matthew snapped back to reality, they had vanished completely, and then the cold, hard realization hit him. He needed to call the police. He fumbled for his phone, his hands shaking. Trying to keep his voice steady, he described the girl's appearance to the officer on the other end. Her calm demeanor, her simple clothes, her uncanny connection with the horse. He had a good memory for faces, but the image was already seared into his mind. The officer, a woman named Davis, was patient but skeptical. She wasn't sure if it qualified as theft, given that the horse had escaped on his own, but Matthew insisted. Messy or not, a $1 million racehorse was gone, and a dangerous situation was unfolding. Officer Davis assured him they would issue an alert. Within minutes, the police station was flooded with calls. Dozens of people reported sightings. A patrol car was dispatched while another team began mapping Phantom's route, using the callers' locations to trace a path through the city. The horse, still carrying the young woman, was moving with unwavering purpose straight through the center of town. It soon became clear he was heading for the suburbs on the far edge of the city. But how could a horse navigate a city with such certainty? Just as the police began to close in on their projected location, the pair reached the city's edge. They slipped beyond the final streets and into the sprawling countryside. And then, the tips and sightings stopped. The trail went cold. The police continued their search, but the horse and rider seemed to have evaporated into thin air. With no more leads, Officer Davis suggested a new plan: return to the track. Someone there must have seen something more. When Matthew got back, the anger was palpable. The event had continued, but Phantom's absence had left a bitter taste. He was immediately surrounded by frustrated bettors. Many had placed large sums on his horse, swayed by Matthew's own confident assurances. "This was a setup, wasn't it?" one man snarled, getting right in Matthew's face. "You take our money and your horse just runs away?" The accusation of being a scam artist, a common but ugly stain on the racing world, shocked Matthew to his core. He tried to explain, to make them understand that he had lost more than anyone, but his words were lost in their fury. His reputation was in tatters, but at that moment, he didn't care. He just wanted to find his horse. Dejected, he realized no one here could help him. His hope began to curdle into despair. That's when it happened. A heavy impact from behind sent him stumbling, and he fell hard to the ground. Before he could even register the pain, the man who had bumped into him was leaning down, helping him up with a surprisingly strong grip. "Watch your step," the man muttered. As their hands met, Matthew felt a small, folded object being pressed into his palm. The man gave him a short, meaningful nod, and then disappeared back into the crowd. None of the nearby officers saw the exchange. Matthew's heart hammered against his ribs. He opened his hand. It was a note, the handwriting rushed but legible. "Meet me behind the stables in 5 minutes. Come alone." 1,000 warnings screamed in his head, but the sliver of hope was too powerful to ignore. He approached the officers, mumbled an excuse about needing to make some private calls, and slipped away. Behind the stables, The air was cool and quiet. The man was waiting in the shadows. "Where is he?" Matthew asked, his voice raw. The man, older, with the weary eyes of someone who had seen too much of the racing world, held up a hand. "I know the girl," he said quietly. "I brought her here." Matthew's jaw went slack. The man explained he'd found her hitchhiking on the southern road that morning. She looked desperate, and since he was heading to the races, he'd offered her a ride. She barely spoke, just stared out the window with a fierce determination. He didn't trust the police and had his own reasons for staying out of trouble, but he saw the genuine panic in Matthew's eyes. He made Matthew promise to keep his name out of it, then gave him the address where he had picked the girl up. The drive felt endless. With Matthew in the back of Officer Davis's patrol car, they sped toward the location, a 30-minute drive into the countryside in the exact direction Phantom had been heading. When they arrived, they all stared in disbelief. The address led to a sprawling, immaculate farm. It was a sanctuary of rolling green pastures where dozens of horses roamed freely. As they cautiously stepped onto the property, Matthew saw a group of young people tending to the animals, and then, among them, he saw her, the girl. Her name, he would soon learn, was Stacy. When she saw them, a look of startled recognition crossed her face. She knew she was caught. She didn't run. She simply stood still, waiting. Just as they approached, an older man and woman rushed out from the main farmhouse, their faces etched with concern. "What are you doing to our daughter?" the woman cried out, her voice protective and fierce. It took several minutes for everyone to calm down. Seated around a rustic picnic table, the story finally unfolded. This was a horse rescue center run by Stacy's family. They cared for animals that were old, mistreated, or retired. And then came the revelation that tied everything together. Phantom had been born on this very farm. His mother, a rescued mare, had arrived pregnant. He was a strong, beautiful foal, and Stacy, the couple's youngest daughter, had spent every waking moment with him. They had formed an unbreakable bond. When the family faced financial hardship, they had been forced to sell him. They'd believed the buyer's promises of a good home. They never imagined he would end up in the high-pressure world of racing. The buyer had fabricated a prestigious bloodline, selling Phantom to another owner, who eventually sold him to Matthew for an exorbitant sum. Stacy confessed she had been tracking Phantom for months after discovering he was being raced. The trip to the track was a desperate, last-ditch effort. She never planned to steal him, but when he saw her, when he ran to her, she only had one thought: to bring him home. Her parents were stunned. She had hidden the horse in a back stable, too scared to tell them what she'd done. Everyone sat in silence, moved by the story. Matthew looked from Stacy's tear-streaked face to Phantom, who was now standing peacefully in a nearby pasture, occasionally nuzzling Stacy's shoulder when she went to him. Legally, the horse was his. He thought about the money he'd lost, the debt, the damage to his name. He could press charges, demand compensation. But looking at the profound, undeniable connection between the girl and the horse, he knew he couldn't. It was a bond that money couldn't buy and a contract couldn't break. "He belongs here," Matthew said, his voice quiet but firm. He explained later that in that moment, he understood that some things were more important than winning a race. He saw a love so pure it had defied miles, years, and fences, and above all else, he was just happy that Phantom was finally, truly, back where he belonged.